Senator Cormann.
Mr. Acting Deputy President, I move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is the bill be read a third time. All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Minister. Oh, so Clerk, I think. Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
I just indicated that the opposition both opposed the second reading and the third reading. We're not going to call a division. So the government opposed the second reading, and that's the difficulty when you're trying to run from that side, Senator Cormann. The government opposed the second reading and the third reading. We continue to oppose it. I've not called the division because, in the interests of time, we do need to proceed to legislation to deal with other matters that are urgent.
Thank you, Minister. Clerk.
A bill for an act to amend the Health Insurance Act 1973 to provide for the revival of certain medical services items should later items be disallowed. Business of the Senate notice of motion number 3 for the disallowance of certain medical services items.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. On behalf of the opposition, I move the motion standing in my name and in the names of the Leader of the Family First Party, Senator Fielding, and Senator Xenophon. Now, Mr. Acting Deputy President, we are moving this disallowance to stop the Rudd Labor government from halving Medicare rebates for cataract surgery. We consider this to be one of a series of ill-considered and short-sighted budget cuts in the health portfolio. It's a budget cut that would hurt mostly elderly patients in need of timely and affordable access to high-quality cataract surgery. It would make access to this life-changing surgery unaffordable for many. It would force tens of thousands of Australians to join lengthy public hospital queues. Or at its worst, it will see people go blind when that is entirely preventable through this life-changing cataract surgery. It will hurt in particular patients across rural and regional Australia. And, Mr. Acting Deputy President, I propose to read a particular email which I received from an ophthalmologist from regional New South Wales. And I quote, "Just to let you know, I am one of the ophthalmologists who provide services to rural areas, Bourke and Griffith. I have just given my notice of resignation for Bourke as I can no longer provide the services under the proposed new arrangements. My last operating list in Bourke will be October 29/30. Similarly, I am seriously considering not entering into a new contract with Greater Southern Area Health Service for Griffiths. I am the only bulk billing eye surgeon in Griffiths on the basis of the proposed cuts." So here we've got somebody who is saying on the basis of the cuts proposed by the government, she is no longer going to provide any services whatsoever into the rural area around Bourke, and she's no longer going to provide bulk billing services into the area around Griffith. And I quote again, "As I am in receipt of Commonwealth funding to cover travel for my trips to Griffith and not Bourke, this may allow me to continue to provide the Griffith service a little longer." End of quote. Now, and I'll just read one other one from the same region. And this is from an ophthalmologist who was quite happy for me to use his name and to release his name. His name is Ashish Agar, and he works for the Outback Eye Service at the Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney. Now, this is what he says. "I wish to highlight some of the public surgery at risk if this funding cut is not retracted. This is an often overlooked aspect of the discussion. How much so was revealed in discussions with the Federal Health Department only last week." And I received this email late last night. "In response to a query regarding how regional and remote areas will cope with the cutbacks, we were advised not to worry, as the proposal is all about private surgery. This degree of misunderstanding, and I'm still quoting, would be laughable, worthy of the best of yes minister, were it not from our principal public health body, and so close to the date of the proposed change. As it stands, though, this statement was simply frightening. The government really have absolutely no idea of the tsunami about to hit public cataract surgery in Australia. May I give our own service as an example? The Outback Eye Service is based at the Prince of Wales Hospital, Sydney, and evolved from the pioneering efforts of our former professor, Fred Hollows, in the 1970s. It is a free, completely publicly funded, comprehensive ophthalmic service covering the far west of New South Wales. The most important health intervention we provide these remote communities is cataract surgery. We are in fact restoring sight to over a dozen citizens in Burke District Hospital with Sydney-based surgeons and nurses, as well as local staff at this very time. Unfortunately, and I'm still quoting, Minister, this now appears to be the last surgical trip we will be making offering this life-changing procedure. The funding cut of 50% makes our service unviable, and there is no private option for us to recoup our costs from the patients, which on a matter of principle we would not entertain in any case. Decades of arguably the most cost-effective public health intervention is about to be denied to those who need it most: the elderly, isolated, Indigenous and socially disadvantaged. Now, this is what this debate is all about, Minister. These are the people that the opposition, with the support of Senators Fielding, Xenophon and the Greens, is standing up for. Now, cataract surgery is a truly life-changing procedure. It prevents blindness through the removal of the natural lens of the eye, which has developed an opacification or cataract, and by replacing that natural lens with a synthetic lens to restore visibility. That makes cataract surgery, as I've mentioned before, a very effective preventative health measure, helping to prevent falls and fractures and mental stress and isolation. Affordable and timely access to this treatment can mean maintaining an independent life, continuing to live at home, continuing to drive a car, continuing to remain active. Now, this impost on our mostly senior Australians is particularly offensive given the reckless government spending in most other areas of government. When the Rudd Labor government has been spending like drunken sailors, we had spending spree after spending spree, cash splashes, stimulus payments, you name it. And yet here we are. We have the Rudd Labor government forcing elderly Australians in need of timely and affordable access to this procedure to pay the price for that reckless spending. Now, this is not about a sensible, well-considered saving based on real efficiencies. The reality is this. This is the way it would have worked, Mr. Acting Deputy President. The Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the Minister for Finance would have gone to Nicola Roxon as the Minister for Health and Ageing on winning government, and they would have said, we want $6.5 billion out of your portfolio. We want $6.5 billion out of your portfolio. So the first $3.1 billion they thought was going to be easy. We're going to run up this 70% tax grab on alcohol pops, and we're going to sell it as a health measure. So that one is in the bag. Now they hit a snag, and the Australian people were very suspicious because they pretty well realised that this was about revenue rising and not about a health measure. But then we've had about $3.5 billion in spending cuts in the health portfolio, while there is reckless spending everywhere else. Australians in need of timely access to affordable health care have to pay the price for the Rudd Labor government's reckless spending in every other area of government. And you know what? We were told that health was going to be a high priority. You've got to be kidding. Now, I'll just give you some examples. $960 million saving out of the changes in the Medicare levy surcharge, $1.9 billion saving which they were seeking out of the private health insurance rebate reductions, $100 million they were seeking to save out of a very ill-considered cut to chemotherapy funding, a further $450 million cuts through cuts to the extended Medicare safety net, and of course $150 million through cuts to Medicare rebates, which includes the $98 million in cuts to rebates for cataract surgeries. And there are others. But you know what they've all got in common? They're all targeted at one proportion of the Australian population. This divisive, this ideological government is targeting those Australians who access their health care through the private health system. Now, we on this side of the parliament, we believe in both a strong and well-funded public system and a strong and well-supported private system. The Rudd Labor government before the last election promised they believed in the same, but we've seen again and again that that was just nothing else than pre-election rhetoric. Now, I'll go through some of the facts that came out of Senate estimates last week, from answers by Health Department officials to questions in Senate estimates. Well, firstly, we know that nearly 200,000 cataract surgery procedures are performed across Australia every year. More than 70% of those procedures are performed in the private system. Now, Nicola Roxon, the Minister for Health and Ageing, wants us to believe that this rebate for cataract surgery only covers this 15-minute, easy, cheap, simple procedure, the surgery, at the time of surgery. Well, the reality is it does also include, of course, and the department considered this, a period of post-operative care, including further consultations. Now, contrary to any assertions by the Minister, as I've mentioned before in my contribution on the bill, the government has actually no idea how long cataract surgery takes, given they do not collect such data either through the MBS or otherwise. The departmental officials did not dispute the findings of an AMA survey that 70% of ophthalmologists take between 25 to 40 minutes for cataract surgery, not the 15 to 20 minutes advanced by the Minister without any tangible evidence. Now, Health Department officials confirmed that since the rebate was first introduced, now since the rebate was first introduced is a very important phrase, because the government, in answers to questions on notice, said when the rebate was first introduced, it took 45 minutes to perform the surgery. So since the rebate was first introduced, the government wants us to believe it went, it's now much more simple and cheaper and quicker to provide the surgery. Well, have you ever heard Nicola Roxon talk about the fact that there have been major cuts to this rebate in the past? Have you heard that, Mr. Acting Deputy President? I bet you haven't. But I mean, let me just inform the Senate that Health Department officials confirmed that since the rebate was first introduced, the cataract surgery rebates have already been cut twice, by 30% in 1987 and 10% in 1996, undermining assertions by the Minister that this further 50% cut is necessary to cater for improvements since the rebate was first introduced. Now, the value of the MBS fee rebate has reduced even further over time, given the average indexation of around 2% per annum in other years was well below the Health Services Cost Index or the Health CPI, or increases in average weekly earnings, or even just CPI, you name it. Now, whatever the Minister might think or might want to make people believe, and Minister Ludwig mentioned, they earn $500,000. Now, I mean, I'm not sure whether Minister Ludwig has run a business. I certainly am sure that Minister Roxon hasn't run a business, because I mean, income, revenue is only one part of the equation in a business. There's also costs, and if costs go up in the real world. Costs don't go up below CPI. Wage costs don't go up by less than average weekly earnings. I mean, that is something that the Minister hasn't even acknowledged. Now, there's actually an important point here. In 1996, the government made a deliberate decision to index the MBS, the Medicare benefit schedule, by less than CPI. Why? To to essentially include an assumption for productivity gains. I mean, since the item was first introduced, so there's an inbuilt assumption of productivity gains in the way the indexation of the MBS actually works. So since the item was first introduced, when surgery took 45 minutes, we had 30% reduction in rebates in 1987, a further 10% reduction in 1996, and since 1996, a deliberate decision to keep indexation below CPI to essentially build in those productivity gains. Now, having imposed all these productivity gains over the past 22 years, the government is now turning around and saying we want to squeeze another 50% out of this lemon. There comes a time when there is nothing left to squeeze. Now, there is actually a very interesting Access Economics report into all of this. It's dated 2004, so it was after this particular type of indexation had been in place for 12 years, and it deals with the impact on general practice. But the principle is the same, and I urge Minister Roxon to have a very close look at how the indexation of the MBS works and how productivity gains are actually built in to the way that indexation is worked out. Now, the reality is the government had a political strategy on this, and the government's political strategy was again here on display in the Senate today, in the Minister's comments. I mean, the two main arguments are: one, ophthalmologists earn too much, and two, the procedure is now much simpler, faster, and presumably, according to the government, cheaper to perform. Now, let's consider those arguments in turn. Well, first, the attack on doctors, on ophthalmologists. When the minister's main argument in favour of these cuts to Medicare rebates for cataract surgery is that ophthalmologists earn too much. True to form, the Minister for Health and Ageing is running yet another campaign demonising a group of Australians. Incredibly, she even enlisted, and this is extraordinary, she even enlisted the support of the Australian Labor Party organisation, making the government's attack on ophthalmologists party political. Does she realise that she's a minister of the Crown, that she's no longer involved in student politics? I mean, in her ham-fisted determination to push this through, she was completely oblivious to the invaluable contribution ophthalmologists have made and will continue to make to our community, of course, alongside all of our many hard-working and dedicated healthcare professionals across other areas. Now, the government, again today, attacked the opposition because we're siding with the specialists. The reality, Minister, is we are standing up for patients, first and foremost. But to think that the government considers it to be a good idea to run a campaign against a group of healthcare professionals based on the politics of envy is a matter of great concern. I mean, a month or so it was community pharmacists as part of the budget cut on chemotherapy. Then it was Australians with private health insurance. This week it's ophthalmologists, who are going to be the people in the minister's sights next week. Now, the government says this is about doctors earning too much. Well, the government is not doing a single thing about doctors' fees. Doctors' fees will not change as a result of the cut in rebate that is payable to patients. The only thing that will change is the out-of-pocket expense faced by patients. It will go up. There is no change to the government, to the doctors' fees as a result of what the government is doing. Now, I'm going to rush through this very, very quickly, Mr. Acting Deputy President. One of the sources that the government did mention was an article in the British Medical Journal, where the minister essentially took a quote out of context. That is, in fact, the only reference that I've seen the minister give as to where she got that 15-minute reference from. And I'll just quote from the author of the article, which has been quoted from by Minister Roxon. And it's Professor Tien Wong, who is Professor of Ophthalmology at the Centre of Eye Research, Australia, University of Melbourne. And I read the quote. "I would like to state categorically that my British Medical Journal editorial is misquoted in this context. First, it is an opinion editorial piece on how cataract surgery has evolved. I did not conduct a formal research project to evaluate specifically cataract surgery time. Second, the surgical time, of course, is only a small part of the cataract surgery procedure. There are pre- and post-op assessments. Cataract surgery is very cost-effective, and even at the current price, and there are major significant adverse effects of not doing it. For example, the Blue Mountains Eye Study has shown the impacts of visual impairment on falls, hip fractures, earlier institutionalisation, loss of self-rated health, depression, earlier mortality, etc. The minor savings will be eaten up many times over by the cost of not doing cataract surgery." End of quote. Now, Mr. Acting Deputy President, the government hasn't thought this through. And I just quickly also touch on the item of complex cataract procedures, because we have included it into the disallowance, and I think it's important for the Senate to understand why we've done it. I mean, everything here is smokes and mirrors with this government. They all of a sudden, just because they describe something as complex, as a complex procedure and complex item, they think that people believe that that's actually what they're doing. You know what they've done? They've taken the item number 42702, which is the most used item, which 95% or even more perhaps of cataract surgery is claimed under the item 42702. They've indexed it by the 2% that is applied every time when the MBS schedule is indexed, and they've renamed it. So they've taken the old standard rebate, they've applied the usual 2% indexation, which has been applied pretty well across the board of the MBS schedule, and then they rename it complex surgery, and then they cut everything else. So the reason we've included it into the disallowance, and we have consulted with the profession about this, is because once this disallowance motion, if it were to be successful in relation to the 3 other Medicare benefit schedule items, then essentially this complex item becomes redundant. This complex item was only ever part of the political strategy by the minister, and I mean, I'll use Minister Ludwig's terminology. This was part of Minister Roxon's political cover. She wanted to say that she was doing something reasonable. We are taking $98 million out of this service. We're forcing tens of thousands of patients into the public system where this procedure costs more. But look, aren't we reasonable? Aren't we wonderful? Because we've created this new complex item. And you know what? She actually tried to announce it twice. It was announced on budget night. And then in October, when the government was trying to crank up its scare campaign, all of a sudden it got re-announced as if it was a new sort of revelation. I mean, I've had question after question from journalists because every now and then they don't do enough research. Some of them are really good. They do a lot of research. But others aren't quite as good. And when they see a press release come from the minister together with all the spin doctors walking the press gallery, they might take the minister at her word. So when in October the minister says, look at this, we've got this compromise proposal. We've got a new complex item. Like, only if you scratch the surface do you actually realise that that is just a re-announcement. Now, I would have, if I had more time, I would have actually gone into the answers the minister refused to provide us in relation to the constructive proposal by the ophthalmologist profession on achieving savings through Avastin, using Avastin instead of Lucentis. But the reality is, the only thing I say is the department has told me here today that the minister has had advice from them since the 26th of June 2009 in relation to that matter. What has the government done? Nothing. This is yet another thing where the Minister for Health and Ageing has been sitting on her hands.